It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I am so excited to talk with my guest today. Actually, a personal inspiration for me. He doesn't know this yet, but joining me is Lee Dumas. He's the founder and host of Entrepreneur on Fire, an award-winning podcast where he interviews today's most successful entrepreneurs 7 days a week. And he's interviewed over 1,200 entrepreneurs and generates over 1 million monthly listens. As I said before, in fact, I was hearing John speak at a conference a year ago that inspired me to start my own podcast, this one here. So, John, welcome to Accelerate.
Andy, I am fired up to be here, brother. Let's do this.
Let's do it. So take a minute, introduce yourself beyond the little bit that I gave the audience.
Sure. From Maine, went to college on an Army scholarship. I spent the next 8 years post-college as an officer in the U.S. Army, 4 active, 4 in the reserves. Did a little 13-month tour of duty in a place called Iraq. After the military, tried law school, hated it, quit after 1 semester, tried corporate finance, died a slow death in a cubicle till I left, and then tried real estate for 4 years, both residential and commercial in San Diego and in Maine, and it just wasn't me. So finally, at the age of 32, after years of struggling and not really finding any success to speak of, I decided to launch a podcast called EOFire, where I interview today's most inspiring and successful entrepreneurs 7 days a week. I have now done over 1,400 episodes.
Wow.
And generate over 1 million listens per month, as you mentioned. And it has been quite the journey. And I'm excited when I hear people like yourself, Andy, that were inspired by my podcast to now share your message, mission, and voice with the world. So thank you.
Well, no, but thank you. I mean, I heard you speak at Icon 2015, and the light went on. And so, but it's not really a straight line from corporate finance to real estate to, now where does podcast come out of that?
It was just out of a desire to self-educate. You know, I tried listening to audiobooks, but the fact was they were expensive and I didn't have a lot of money. So I said, what can I do that's free? And I started finding out about podcasts and said, wow, this is free, on-demand, targeted content. This is amazing. And that was the start of me listening for a long time. And then I kind of flipped it on its head and started producing the podcast. Because the reality was this, and I think this is a good lesson for a lot of people, no matter what niche industry section of the world you're in. It's like, what's that thing that you know is missing in the world? You can just see it's missing. And now, do you want to fill that void? Now, most of the time, you're going to say no, and that's good because you shouldn't be doing everything. You shouldn't be filling every void. But for me, when I asked the question, what was missing in the podcasting world, it was a daily podcast interviewing inspiring entrepreneurs because I wanted that to exist. So I knew others must too. It didn't exist. So I said, I'm going to be the change that I wish to see in the world and start a daily podcast. And that was the birth of EOFire 4 years ago.
And it seems like today, the podcast is sort of poised to be sort of what the blog was before, right? It's an easy way for people to create content to help develop their brand, develop thought leadership, add content to their platform. I mean, is it really that simple?
Yeah, it kind of is. I mean, podcasting is, one of those things where you can just grab a mic, jump on Skype, or if you don't want to interview anybody, you can just hit a record button in a pretty easy editing and recording software like an Audacity and Audition, and you're off to the races. Because once you get that recording done, you can upload it to Media Host, and poof, it can be off to the world. Now, the reality is to create a good podcast. Now, that takes some work, and that takes some energy and effort and some dedication and some studying and some being mentored by the right people. But, when it comes down to it, podcasting's pretty darn simple.
Yeah, and I think that people oftentimes, when they think about creating some content on their website, that facing that blank page is really a daunting prospect. But talking into a microphone is a lot easier for most people. I mean, write down a couple bullet points on a paper, and you can start talking about something.
Yeah, I've had some people on the flip side that say, I could never flip on a microphone and talk. I feel like I can at least have a conversation with myself in my head when I'm writing a blog post, but I could never just look at a microphone and just speak. That's just not how I operate. So I think the important thing is just knowing who you are, where your strengths and your weaknesses are. I definitely have the ability to just look into a microphone and start talking. And it wasn't always very eloquently. That came with 1,400 interviews. But the reality is that, it was something that came easier to me than blogging for sure. So I went to the path of least resistance.
So for a small business, should they have a podcast? I mean, if they're sitting there looking at somewhat of a blank slate as far as their content marketing platform, is a podcast a good way to start for them?
I think every small business needs to sit down and decide what their goals are. What is your goal as a small business? Now, if one of your goals as a small business, and by the way, this is not the goal, rightfully so, of every small business, but if one of your goals is, I want to connect intimately with my customers, with my clients, with listeners. I want to get my brand more out there in a medium like iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, Pandora, Google Play, fill in the blank. If you want to leverage directories because you think that your customers and clients are there, and by the way, a lot of small businesses, your clients are not there. And you need to know that. But if your clients are there, if they're hanging out in these places, if they want to consume content that you're creating because it's good, it's inspiring, it's meaningful, it's worthy of their very limited bandwidth and time, and then you have somebody who has the ability to turn on a microphone and to have an engaging conversation with another or to go on a little rant about a topic, then maybe you should look into a podcast because it's a great way for you to grow an audience that knows, likes, and trusts you, to have a great brand play that's being leveraged by directories like iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, fill in the blank. But again, it's not for everybody. We all have limited time, energy, effort, bandwidth. And we need to say, hey, how is my bandwidth best allocated? And for any number of reasons, Andy, you decided at some point that your time and energy was best allocated, at least partially, towards a podcast. And here we are today.
Here we are. Well, you made a great comment about intimate connection. And that, to me, that seems to one of the real critical things about, or let's say valuable points about a podcast, is that compared to sort of shorter form content, is a little bit longer form with the blog does enable people to form that more intimate connection with you, have a better sense of you personally, as you said, appeal to the know, like, trust equation that people talk about before they want to buy, that you just don't get in writing. And I've had people come on my show that guess that, write back afterwards and said, hey, I signed contracts because somebody heard me on your show, and they'd been on my list for a while, but they'd never pulled the trigger to buy anything.
That's one thing that I've definitely realized as well with podcasting. It's very intimate because of the voice. Nothing against blogs. We definitely blog ourselves, and I write email newsletters almost every single day. But words on a paper are never going to connect like voice to the ears. I mean, it's just a human desire, a human trait, a human just innate quality that we have, that we're just drawn to voice. We just love the voice. We're connected to voice. That's what we grew up hearing even before we could even see, just blurriness. We could hear our mother's voice or our father's voice or whatever that might be. And we're connected to that, to the intimacy of that. So if that's something that you want to have as a connection level with people, then a podcast is a great medium for that. Because I have people all the time that come up to me and say, John, it's so weird. I feel like I know you. I listen to your podcast every day. And I say to them, that's not weird, because I feel like I know other podcast hosts that I listen to, because that's the type of medium that podcasting is. It's a great way to connect in a very intimate level with the listeners.
Yeah, I was just at a conference this morning and someone recognized me by my voice.
Right.
And that was really sort of a mind-blowing experience, is they had never met me in person, but they recognized my voice when I was talking to somebody else and it overheard me. Very interesting. All right. So, and I think the other thing that goes along with that intimate connection is that in sales these days, given how crowded markets are, especially in the business-to-business space, that people are the first line of differentiation. It's not really what you're selling as much as how you sell. And I'm a huge believer in that. At the end of the day, in business-to-business selling, you get down to this intimate connection is really critical, because that could be what sets you apart from somebody else.
I think we're all looking for ways to differentiate ourselves and to kind of have that step above where we can say, hey, listen, this is this, this is that. And, for a lot of people for a long time, that was their book. Everybody was saying your book is your new business card. And, in some ways that still works today. Having a published book is definitely not what it used to be because the barrier is so much lower with Amazon and CreateSpace and all those things. But still, you sat down and wrote a book, and that's one thing. Now with a podcast, that's kind of another area where when you reach out to someone and say, hey, I have a podcast and I have listeners and I'm featured in iTunes and I'm on, Google Play and I'm in Spotify, like that means something. And people realize that means something. So that's kind of like the next level business card that I see a lot of people using to connect to their influencers, to people that they admire, that they want to learn from in a very powerful way.
And something very practical is that you can go out and if you're a small company, a mid-sized company, any size actually, if you want to use your podcast as a sales tool, is go invite the key influencers, key decision makers from targeted accounts that you want to do business with to come be guests on your show.
Yeah.
There you have a great way to sort of a neutral environment to have that first conversation that's not overtly sales, to start building a relationship on a level that's based around thought leadership and content and not a pitch. And it can open doors that wouldn't be open before.
Love that.
Yeah, it's a great tool for people. So when people think about the prospect now of starting, and you do a lot of work with helping companies start podcasts or helping individuals start podcasts, you sort of talked about before, what's sort of the first step? I think the goal is what you had mentioned before. Setting their goal.
Yeah, when you're looking to podcasts, there's a number of different ways that you can really kind of go and approach that. But actually, I think the most important thing is really deciding on your topic. Like, what is the actual topic that you are going to be spending your days, weeks, months, and hopefully years talking about, whether talking to other people? What is the focal point of your show going to be? And I think this is critical, again, that a lot of people just really don't spend enough time getting into because they just say, oh, well, I see this podcast is working in this topic. I see this podcast is working, in this area. I'm just going to go ahead and mimic and copy that. The reality is this, like, you need to be looking at podcasting as a marathon. This is going to be something that if you want to really reap the benefits and you really want to be, seeing the success for all this work you're putting in, it's going to come 6 months, a year, 2 years from now. That's when it really happens. Right now is like the glory time for me with EOFire, and that's my 4th year. Like, it's taken this long to have the snowball effect happen. Believe me, I've had a lot of success in year 2 and year 3, but it's really built off of itself. And that's the beauty of a podcast, is it really is like a snowball. So it starts with your topic because you have to still be passionate to have the conversations and to talk about the topic a year from now, 3 years from now, just as much as you are the first day. So really taking time, energy, and care to sit down and say, what do I want my podcast to be focused on? And believe me, you can adjust, you can pivot, you can make small changes and evolve, and you can evolve along the way, but it has to be in a very intentional and meaningful way. So
how have you evolved in your audience? Because you start off, this is a self-educational prospect or project, if you will. How have you evolved from the first day? Yeah, it's really interesting. I've seen a lot of podcasts really evolve in very serious ways, and in some ways look a little bit or a lot different than they did when they start. EOFire, just one of those things. I just crushed it from day one with what my topic was going to be. It was going to be interviews with entrepreneurs focusing on their worst moments, their aha moments, what fires them up right now, and then a lightning round of 6 questions. And guess what? That was episode 1, and that was also episode 1400. So that just happened, and that's not always going to happen. Like, I've had plenty of things in my life that haven't worked out that way. I just happened to kind of close my eyes, swing the bat, and hit a grand slam with EOFire. Just as many, just like I have 100 times swung the bat and completely struck out and missed. This happened to be a home run. But the powerful thing about that is that, like, I found my thing and I've stuck with it. So hey, if you hit it out of the park the first time, just stick with it. Otherwise, be willing to evolve. If you learn some things, you get feedback from your audience to make things happen. And there's no magic about frequency as much as there is about consistency, right? Being there, once you develop the audience, having them be able to rely on you to be there. It's all about consistency. Frequency has a very small role in it. If you have a weekly podcast, twice a week podcast, once a month podcast, as long as you're consistent and you're serving your audience in a very powerful and unique way, and you're just
delivering great value, you're going to win with your podcast. It's just a matter of how much and when.
So what would you give somebody that advice starting out that's saying, maybe a small business saying that we want to start, sort of reaching out to our customer base, inviting maybe some customers to be guests? Is it weekly, monthly? What should they be considering in terms of what is the right frequency for them?
They should be surveying their audience, and that survey should ask their audience, if we were to create something in the audio form, like a podcast, what would that look like to you that you would actually listen? Like, how many days per week would be of most value to you? What type of content would you like to hear? How long would you like to have it be? Start taking the pulse of your current audience, of your current customers, your clients, of your target market. Start taking that pulse. And hey, once you have that pulse taken in, then you can really be off to the races and start creating the content and continuing to elicit feedback every step of the way.
So how do you do that with yours? Do you survey your audience?
I don't, because I just have a very standard format and it just works for me, and it's always worked, and I go forward with that. Now, when I'm looking to create a product, a service, or a community, I'm definitely surveying my audience. Like, for instance, when I launched the Freedom Journal, I surveyed my audience and I asked them, what exactly do you want? What exactly do you need? Like, where are you struggling with? And my audience was struggling with setting and accomplishing goals. So I created the resource for people to accomplish their number one goal in 100 days in the form of a beautiful faux leather gold embossed journal that guides you with daily tasks, nightly recaps, 10-day sprints, quarterly reviews. And people were like, well, how'd you come up with all of this? And I said, well, I asked my audience what they needed, what they wanted, and I put their problems, pain points, and obstacles into the solution, which is this journal. And the survey was key for that.
So a question back to audience. So podcasts, I mean, you've got this hugely successful podcast, you get 1 million listeners a month. How do the demographics break out? I mean, are they fundamentally dominated by millennials?
It's hard to say. You don't really get great statistics on that level when it comes to podcasting. You get great demographics. Like, I know exactly where my listeners are coming from. I know that like 81% are in the continental United States. I know that I have a big listenership in both the UK and Australia, and Canada is pretty large as well. But the reality is, and I also know that like what device they're listening on, whether it be an iPad, an iPhone, an Android, whatever that might be. But I don't know their age range. I don't know their male-female breakdown. That's just not statistics that iTunes gives to their podcast listeners. So there's a lot of things that I don't know, but I can tell you that my most engaged listeners are not millennials, because those are the people that reach out to me and ask me questions and follow me on Snapchat and do other places. They're people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who are really looking to start this thing for the first time. Like, this is their second, third, fourth career, or second, third, fourth time trying something in entrepreneurship, and they want to learn from those who have come before them.
Very interesting. Yeah, because I think there's certainly this predisposition on part of people to believe that it's mostly millennials that are listening to podcasts. But yeah, I've had sort of the same experience. It doesn't really seem, when I look at the comments I get online and so on, it doesn't really seem to be that way. So if you're out there and you're in the audience, think about, gosh, I don't want to do a podcast because only millennials are going to be listening to it. A, there's nothing wrong with that. But B, that's not necessarily going to be the case.
So true. It's kind of funny, actually, when it comes to millennials. I'm either the oldest millennial or I'm the youngest Gen Xer, because every time I hear the thing, it's like millennials are like 1980 and above, right around there. And Gen Xers are like 1979 and below. And I was born like in the last 15 days of 1979.
Well, you embody both then, let's say. So, all right. So I'm going to end up, I know you have some rapid fire questions you end up your show with. I've got the same thing here. So let me pose the first one. It's a question that all my guests have answered.
Do you want rapid fire answers too?
Well, not on this one. This one, I'll get to the next ones. Those will be rapid fire. This one takes a little thought. So Here's a hypothetical scenario. You've just been hired as a new VP of sales at a company whose sales have stalled out. And the company, the CEO, is really anxious for things to get turned around in a hurry. So your first week on the job, what 2 things could you do that would have the biggest impact?
I would sit down with every single one of the sales reps and I would do an in-depth interview. And I would say, your voice is probably not heard because frankly, most businesses do a terrible job actually asking real questions and the right questions to their employees. So what's working here? What's not working here? What are your ideas to turn this around? Because you're in the trenches. And then I would also get the 5 top customers from each single one of the sales reps. And I would call that customer up each individually. So hopefully there's at least 50 of them there. And I would have 50 conversations with these people about what they like about our service, why they're our best customers, and what they would want to see more of. And those would be the 2 things that I would do in the first couple of weeks.
Okay, great answer. Great. All right, so these could be rapid fire questions. You can elaborate if you wish. We've got a little bit of time here. So the first one is when you, JLD, are out selling your products, services, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
My language that I use, the vocabulary that I have. And the reason why I'm able to make it powerful is because I listen. I listen to my audience when they share with me their pain points or obstacles or challenges. And then I create the solution and offer to them using the language that they describe to me with their pain points.
So can you give us an example of what you've done with that?
Just like somebody saying, oh my God, I just hate my voice. I could never podcast. I would then turn around and say, listen, 99% of people hate their voice. So you are in the vast majority of that. The reality is this, your voice sounds different when it comes out of you than when you're hearing it back. And all it takes is a little bit of time to get used to it because we just don't like what we're not used to. So you have a podcasting voice. It's just a matter of you realizing you need to get used to your own voice before you actually start to like that. So that's kind of one of the big myths I like to kind of dispel with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good one. So next one is, who's your business role model?
I guess one person who I do kind of admire from afar would be Mark Cuban. I just kind of like his attitude about straight to the point. He doesn't pull any punches. He just says it clear. And, he uses his time, energy, and resources to do what he loves, namely own the Dallas Mavericks.
Such a great hobby to have.
So good.
So great. Can't be a better job than that. So one book every entrepreneur should read.
The Chimp Paradox.
The Chimp Paradox. Now, who wrote that?
I don't know.
All right, we're going to have to look that up.
It won't be hard.
So what's it about?
So The Chimp Paradox is an amazing book because it really makes you realize your first reaction is often a bad reaction because it's your chimp brain that's giving you that reaction. Whereas if you actually just relax and kind of take a step back and give a little bit of time for your human brain to catch up to whatever happens, that's probably the reaction you want to go with.
Interesting. So why was that valuable to you?
Because a lot of people, myself included, just go off their gut reaction right away and we don't think. And when we realize that, hey, that's actually our chimp brain that's working right there, why don't I just let the intelligent brain catch up a little bit?
So last question for you. What's on your playlist these days?
As far as music?
As far as music.
I don't listen to music.
Really?
Yeah.
At all?
Actually, the only music that I do listen to is a great app on my computer called Focus at Will. And that is an app that just plays basically music with no lyrics, of course, because if you're listening to music with lyrics, your brain is always being tugged in that direction on some subconscious level. But it's scientifically proven music to help you focus.
Focus at Will. That's interesting. So it's like is it like a Pomodoro timer or?
Yeah, it doesn't really have a timer on it, but it does play music.
Very interesting. Okay, we're going to check that out. Very interesting. Well, good. Well, John, thanks for being on the show today.
'Twas a blast, Andy.
And tell people how they can find out more about you.
All the magic for us happens at EOFire.com. And if you're interested in checking out the Freedom Journal, you can accomplish your number one goal in 100 days at thefreedomjournal.com.
And I'm going to put a plug in for you as well. So for people that are looking at starting a podcast, John offers this great resource called Podcaster's Paradise. And it was hugely instrumental in my ability to start my podcast as quickly as I did. So,
appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I urge people to check that out. It's a great resource out there. So again, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And an easy way to do that is to make this podcast, Accelerate, a part of your daily routine, whether you listen in the commute, in the gym, or make it part of your morning sales meeting. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, John Lee Dumas, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.